Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
And here is the criticism of John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. You can check out his website every day, johncombest.com. Okay, John, yesterday you were making fun of the Dr. Jills. Two of them being Dr. Jill Biden, and the second one being Dr. Jill, fill in the blank.
Dr. Jill Stein. Yeah. Now, Dr. Jill Stein is she an honorary doctor, or is she like a medical doctor?
Here is, and the reason we bring this up is that they keep referring to Dr. Jill Biden. Now, what's interesting about this is when you're in certain fields, when you're in the education field, and I know a couple people who are in education, one who has a PhD, one has an EDD. PhD is a little bit different because it's a broader, I shouldn't say. I guess it is. It's broader in scope, whereas an EDD essentially is educational doctorate, which is specializing just in education, okay? The Dr. Jill Biden has an EDD. And essentially, outside of education, you're usually not addressed as doctor. Would you pretty much agree is that? I mean,
I would. So, for example, Jill Stein is a physician.
Yes.
So if yesterday that I said that Jill Stein, I didn't know that Jill Stein was a physician until I Wikipedia'd it. So for the record, I was incorrect. I don't know much about Jill Stein. And it turns out she is a physician, so that's a good correction, Brett.
Matter of fact, the bio that was sent to me by the ticked off listener who called you we can't say what it was on what she called you on the air. Here, let me read this real brief. She was raised in Highland Park, Illinois. Stein was raised in a Reformed Jewish household attending Chicago's North Side Congregation, Israel. In 1973, Stein graduated magna cum laude from Harvard College, where she studied psychology, sociology, and anthropology. She then attended Harvard Medical School and graduated in 1979. Stein practiced internal medicine for 25 years at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Simmons College Health Center, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, which are all located in the Boston area. She also served as an instructor of medicine.
Read more, Brad. People want to hear the whole biography.
She also
Can we take up the rest of the segment with the biography? Thank you, Agnes.
She also served as an instructor of medicine at Harvard
Agnes,
Medical
just
School.
Email it to me. Brad will share my cell phone number. And you could just email it to me. Agnes.
So John, you were calling her like an EDD or a PhD. No, she's the real deal. She is a doctor, as opposed to Dr. Jill Biden. She is a real doctor. So take that, John Combest.
My favorite part of driving through the Westplex, other than it's actually a radio station that you can listen to when you're driving through. And I love to hear the same 4 Olivia Rodrigo songs every 5 minutes when the station should actually be all talk. But my favorite part is when you look at the screen if you're driving through the Westplex and you have 107.1 on.
Right.
Occasionally, Brad, your Easter egg, and I don't know if people have noticed this, but you will put on there, "Hi, Agnes," which I think is my favorite Easter egg. So, Brad, I would like to follow that up and just say, "Hi, Agnes. You do wonderful things for Brad and for the station. And just as somebody who's on here an hour on this particular station, an hour every weekday, I appreciate what you do for Brett. And I appreciate you listening, Agnes.
And John, if you don't realize this, on the KSLQ RDS, it says Shelly rocks. That's what it says on there.
Oh, yes, it does. And I still love the ads where occasionally it'll pop up and say, "Your mom called," because that's from, who was that from?
I'm not saying.
Okay. I guess they're not an advertiser anymore. Go ahead, Brad.
No.
So thank you, Agnes. And I do stand corrected. I did not know that Jill Stein was a real doctor. So good for her.
Your mom called. That's Caleb Hunter from Extreme Electrical.
That's right.
Okay. Couple things from yesterday. Actually not from yesterday, but just some interesting things. There's an industry group that represents all the car manufacturers, and they have essentially said that the new rule for automatic braking and this is essentially the idea. Some cars have this already. I think some of the Toyotas have it, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think some of the Teslas have it, where it has this radar, LiDAR combination of things. And if you're driving along and you don't see that bus that's stopped in the traffic lane in front of you, it automatically brakes your car. Well, they're making that mandatory in all cars, but the crazy part of it is the manufacturers are now essentially saying the rules are so stringent that it's literally impossible to comply with them. And essentially, one of the standards is they want to be able to have your car brake from as high as like 91 miles an hour. If you're going 91 miles an hour, they want to have it to the point where it will automatically brake your car to not have accidents. Now, the problem on this is, and this is what some of the car manufacturers are complaining about, it's a very similar situation to the red light camera. You know what the red light camera, one of the rubs against the red light cameras is?
I don't know that.
That people, when they know there is a red light camera there, that they will essentially overcorrect and jam on the brakes because they don't want to get a ticket. So if they're driving along and all of a sudden the yellow hits, bang, they're on the brake, and the guy behind them hits him, which does happen because there are people that are like, oh my God, I can't get a ticket. I can't go through yellow. I'm gonna get a ticket. Right. So they jam on the brakes. Okay. So once again, all the manufacturers. Now, here's the interesting part of this. Do you know what adaptive cruise control is? Do you know what that is? John, are you there?
I'm sorry. I had muted for a half second. No, I don't know what that is.
Okay, adaptive cruise control is really cool. I was first introduced to it years ago when I was doing they were letting me test drive some Ford products, and it was on a Lincoln. The adaptive cruise control is a really cool option, and it's available in a lot of cars right now. Matter of fact, once again, on some Toyotas, I believe it's standard equipment now, where what it does is you once again uses a combination of radar and LiDAR. So when you have your cruise control on and you're driving along and you got your cruise control set at 62 and you come up behind a guy who's doing 58, you either do one of two things. You either kick your cruise control off, you try to pass him. Adaptive cruise control essentially slows down your car. So in other words, if you're doing 62 and the guy in front of you is doing 58, you come up behind him and you can't pass, it essentially will decelerate your car. And some of them you can actually set it for how many car lengths it's active on. In other words, you can set it so to the point where you can come almost on the guy's bumper, or you can set it the other extreme where you're maybe 200 feet behind the guy, and if you're coming up on him slow, it doesn't turn the cruise control off. It just essentially slows the car down. But the problem with adaptive cruise control is, trust me, I know, when you're going around a sweeping curve, the front of your car is not looking directly at the rear of the car in front of you, if you get what I'm saying, because it's not directly in front of you, because the front of your car, if you're making a left-hand sweeping curve, the front of your car is looking to the right of the traffic lanes, because the traffic lanes are going left and vice versa if you go the other way around. If you go a right-hand sweeping curve, your adaptive cruise control is looking to the left. So the problem on this is that with this automatic braking, you have to literally come up directly behind the car for it to work properly. And how many times, once again, look in the St. Louis area, drive I-70 out there in Wentzville with the S-curve going over the railroad trestle. It's a pretty tight curve going through there. And the idea being is if someone was stopped in a traffic lane in front of you, chances are, if you're going through the S-curve, the automatic braking would not work. So they're essentially appealing to the government saying, hey, hold on a minute. These rules, first off, are burdensome, and they're almost unobtainium. Matter of fact, did you know there's another on the periodic chart of elements? There's a element called unobtainium. You ever heard that one before?
I haven't. I thought maybe it was unattainable.
No.
Now, Brad, what the thing with the regulations is, in most cases where the government imposes something that's this onerous, it's because they're trying to get car manufacturers or whatever industry it is to go one direction or another. But what is the government attempting to do? Like, is there one particular technology that they're trying to force everybody into?
No, they're just essentially saying, hey, car manufacturers, we have this pie-in-the-sky idea of what each car should have. You guys figure it out. We don't really care how much it costs, but you put it on the cars or else you can't sell those cars in the United States. That's essentially what they're doing.
I see.
You know, a matter of fact, it's to the point where, you know, and it's funny. I saw a little interview the other day with Elon Musk, and he talked about the fact that how tough it is to manufacture cars nowadays because, he was being exaggerating, of course. He exaggerates somewhat from time to time, but I know what he was saying. He says that in order to manufacture a car in the United States, you have to comply with all these regulations. And he says you could fill a room with books with all the regulations in it on all the different things. And I know exactly what he's talking about. I mean, there are just crazy, weird regulations about the manufacture of cars. And if you go back in the history, some of the worst cars produced in the United States, and for that matter around the world, but the United States cars were the worst, were like the 72 to about 78 American cars. You know why?
Because there was no competition from Japan?
No. There was tremendous competition at that point in time because of the fact that's when the Japanese came in and really started to kick the Americans' butt. Well, they came up with the bumper standard where the bumpers look like battering rams on the front and rear of cars. And essentially you had these big, monstrous bumpers because the whole idea was, once again, somebody in Congress said, well, you know, my grandma, she ran into the back of a truck and she was only doing 2 miles an hour and it did $8,000 worth of damage to her car. And they came up with the standard that you had to essentially had 5 mile an hour bumpers to the point where you could run into a concrete barrier going forward or backwards, you know, front bumper, rear bumper, whichever direction you're headed, and it would cause no damage or very minor damage. There was an amount of damage, like I think a couple $100 worth of damage. You have to replace the bumper cover or something like that. And it made the cars, and the interesting part of that was the law of unintended consequences. It made those cars handle much worse because when you take that weight and you put it, because they had to be these big monstrous bumpers on the front and rear of the cars, when you put that weight so far out in front or out in the rear of the car, it changes the dynamics of how the car handles.
Of course it does, yeah.
And so in other words, interestingly enough, it made the cars more susceptible to spinning out because of the fact that you had this extreme weight that was way out in front, way out in the rear of the car. If you know anything about, cars, the big thing, like all the exotic cars, even the Corvette now, essentially is what they call a mid-engine Corvette, and this has been the way the Ferraris have done this for a long time, and even like the interesting thing is if you go back to the crowd cars, the original Volkswagens, and then the Porsche 911s, they have the engine in the rear, which is different than having the engine in the front, because once again, the dynamics of when you're going around a curve, you have that weight that essentially is going to push the car in a straight line as opposed to going into the curve, and that was what was happening with these big monster bumpers. And that's why, and that's also they started all the crazy weird, pollution standards, the whole bit like that. That's why you just don't see those cars around anymore. I mean, nobody collects them. I shouldn't say nobody. There are some people that collect them, but to the point where they were like these terrible dinosaur cars that back then everybody hated. And that's part of the reason why the Japanese really started making some tremendous inroads, because you go back to 1973 when we had the oil problems and gas prices shot back up. Matter of fact, how old am I, John? There was a time I went to my gas station down by my house and I was cruising out with my buddies on a Friday night. I could go down to the gas station, and I didn't even have to pump the gas. The guy pumped it for me because there was no self-service at the time.
That's right,
and
yeah.
I flipped the guy $1, and I got 4 gallons of gas. The gas was like $23.9 a gallon. I'm not exaggerating. $1, and I could cruise all night long.
You know what the judge said? Whoa, whoa, Grandpa. Tell me about the good old days.
Okay.
Well, we'd go to the Sinclair, see? And the guy pumped the gas for you, see? Now, Brad, I just got an email. I got a criticism from a listener about you. Do you mind if I mention this?
Go ahead. I love criticism. I get it all day long.
The Wentzville S-curve apparently is not a sweeping curve because it's very clearly defined. This listener says Missouri Revised Statute 362436 makes very specific recommendations about what a sweeping curve is. So I just wanted to correct that, Brad. That was incorrect.
Well, John, I don't like that statute. My favorite statute is 402436. That's my favorite statute.
You're telling me. I would go with 362440 because I'm more of like I want the last part of that curve to be much bigger. You know what I'm saying? It depends. I don't know. I guess it depends on where she is in her cycle. Okay. But anyway, thank you to Agnes. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Thank you to the listener for sending that in.
Okay.
We need to correct Brad on facts a lot, you know?
So here's the interesting thing. I'm going to read another story off stlpr.org, but once again, it's this award-winning news department. But guess where this story comes from? Missouri Independent. Okay?
Oh, yeah, of course it does. Go ahead. What is it?
This was published June 21st, okay, by Allison Kite. Do you know who Allison Kite is?
Yes, she's the environmentalist content reporter. She focuses on a lot of anti-corporate messaging and anti-government. I guess I shouldn't say anti-government, but anyway, she's the environmental content creator. Yeah.
Does she have a pixie haircut?
No, I think uniquely, and you know what? There's another young woman, Annalise Hanshaw, who also I believe has long hair too. So I think at some point they have to have a little bit more diversity in terms of follicular fortitude, I guess you could say. You know, go ahead, Brad.
Listen to you, John. Okay. Here's what I don't understand. I'll read the first paragraph of the article. State and local officials from Missouri denounced Kansas City legislators' attempt to lure the Kansas City Chiefs and Royals across the state line, saying they would take steps to keep both teams. Once again, where are our leaders in St. Louis? Tashara Jones should be in Kansas City right now saying, hey, look, we've got this dome. There's a team that played in this dome that won a Super Bowl.
They're called the Battle Hawk.
No. Bring the Kansas City Chiefs to St. Louis. We've already got
a table pounder for Brad. Everybody hear that? It's a table pounder.
You can't hear that over there. You can hear that you can just hear that through your link. Okay. We've already got a dome. Okay. It's ready to roll. It's got 65,000 seats in it. Yeah, it needs a new carpet. If you've seen the latest Battle Hawks game, yeah, it needs to have a new carpet put down. And I bet you any money we could talk Stan Kroenke we could offer Stan $2 for the practice facility out in Earth City. We got a practice facility for you. And then here's what a historical person would also pitch if these crazy nuts in the St. Louis area would pick up on this. We could say, if they're like Tashara Jones could say, we want to bring back the extremely tremendous heritage of the St. Louis area by having an American and a National League ballpark, our National League baseball team, like we did back when. We had the Cardinals, which was the National League team. We had the St. Louis Browns, which are now the Baltimore Orioles. And we had a National and American League team, and they played in the same stadium. And when the Cardinals were on the road, the Browns were at home, and vice versa. And here's where I say, instead of the Cardinals asking for $50 million from the state, if they brought the Kansas City Royals to St. Louis, there would be enough, and they could, when the Royals games were on, they could charge $100 for a hot dog and $150 for a beer. They would have that $50 million to do the renovations to the stadium. And that stadium, essentially, my objection all the time about these stadiums, essentially, if you build the stadium, even though they play 162 games, there's only 81 of them that are home games. We would have 162 games where the Busch Stadium would be used. It would be generating revenue. People would be available to have their car windows smashed and their stuff stolen out of their car.
Yes, exactly.
Right. You could have people being shot on Metrolink going down to the ballpark. I mean,
twice as often. Hey, so Brad, I think it's a great idea. And if folks go to my website today, they could see a link to Pete Mundo's show yesterday. He had a special guest, Scott Fawn, and they discussed specifically, Brad, what's going to happen with the Royals, what's going to happen with the Chiefs. Scott gave his particulars on the greatest domestic terror attack on U.S. soil happened on October 26, 1985. We all know what happened in Kansas City. No disrespect to what happened in New York, which was, I guess, technically the greatest terrorist attack on domestic soil. But Scott lays out exactly what Missouri officials will end up doing, and he gives the details on where the Royals and the Chiefs will end up.
And they'll be in Kansas, correct?
I don't know, Brad. You got to listen to the segment. And also, I'm going to include in the YouTube link that we'll put up later on today for folks who listen. I am going to include buying a new carpet as one of the tags, and then we'll get a little pre-roll from Hans Wyman, Brad. You could give your testimonial about Hans Wyman, pick up a few ad bucks. It'll be great.
But see, why isn't that? Am I just a weirdo? Well, we already know the answer to that question. But why is nobody in the city of St. Louis talking about this? Because the whole thing is we need to keep the Chiefs and the Royals in Missouri. Well, guess what? Last time I checked, St. Louis is in Missouri. It's an independent city.
That's true. But I think, first of all, I think the county is more concerned with a new county building. I don't know if you've seen this, Brad, but all the county employees are down at Shaw Park. And about 8:05 a.m., because everybody gets there about 5 minutes late, all of them are trying to find shade underneath the trees at Shaw Park. There are no county buildings. So the county needs brand new facilities, Brad. And I think that's where our taxpayer money in St. Louis County should be going, not for economic development or not to attract a team from the other side of the state.
Don't you find it interesting that this is my thing going back to the history of the United States and how we tear things down. We build things up and 10 years later we tear it down. That in the state of Missouri we have a Capitol building that's 150 years old?
Yeah.
And in the United States we have a Capitol building which is 150 years old. We have a White House that's, how many years old is the White House? And yet we have a county building in St. Louis County which is 50, 60 years old? Oh my God, got to tear it down. We need a new one. I don't get it. I mean, explain it to me. Why? How is it that on one hand we have the historic, and the same thing with ballparks. How can we have Wrigley Field and how can we have the Green Monster in Boston, Fenway Park, being these iconic ballparks that have been around for, decades upon decades upon decades, but in St. Louis, oh my God, our ballpark's 20 years old, it's fallen down. We need the state to come in and give us money. I don't get it.
Yeah, I think it's mostly because, and by the way, we'll probably have to go in a minute because I'm going down to Sportsman's Park down there in the corner of Grand and Dozier. And wait a minute. Nope, I just read on Waze it says, avoid this route, you will get shot. Well, maybe I won't go to Sportsman's Park today. I was going to see Bill Jennings. I was going to see Ned Garver. He was going to face off against Whitey Ford in the doubleheader today, in the matinee.
John,
today's game, but I guess I'm going to skip out.
Have you ever seen the movie, the original movie, the Jack Reacher movie, the very first one with Tom Cruise?
No, I haven't.
There is a great line in the movie where he is asked his name. You'd have to watch the movie. There's a part in the movie where this lady is essentially propositioning him because she's trying to get him essentially in a fight with her quote unquote brothers. And she knows who he is. She knows it's Jack Reacher. And she sits down at the table and she asks the guy his name, Tom Cruise, who is Jack Reacher. And he gives a different name. And it's interesting because the name he gives is his standard name, and it's like a shortstop for the 52 Yankees, which is his
Phil Rizzuto?
No, I can't remember who it is. I'll find the clip and send it to you, but it's pretty funny because of the fact that's his standard name he gives when anybody asks his name. He never tells his real name. He always and he explains why he does this, which is sort of interesting. So you just did it. Who was it? What was the name you gave again? What was it?
Well, Ned Garver was a hurler for the Browns. He was probably the most prolific starting pitcher for the St. Louis Browns, and then of course the great Whitey Ford.
And then there was
for the New York Yankees.
And we can't forget Eddie Goodell, right?
And Jim Delsing. The Post-Dispatch. I know we're over time. Post-Dispatch just had a headline about Eddie Goodell, and I didn't bother reading it, but I'll read it, Brad. I'll take that as my homework.
Okay, John, I'm out of here. We're a truncated show this morning. You like that? Only two.
I do like that. Hey, you go take care of that. You go cut the grass down by the transmitter, Brad. I know that you're going to hop on a lawnmower and go cut the grass. Hey, avoid those GUIDE wires, please, okay?
Thank you, John. Have a good day.
Bye, guys. See you tomorrow.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?